Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. I've made many videos over the years about different ways that we misunderstand the Norse because perhaps we over-analogize them to other ancient societies. For example, the way that we tend to think of the Norse as all professional warriors because we over-analogize them to the Spartans, rather than thinking of them as being jacks of all trades, men who fought quite a bit by necessity or in order to take something from someone else, but who weren't necessarily professional fighters organized in ranks of soldiers. And another way that we misconceptualize the Norse, and many other cultures too, is imposing on them a later Western society's notions of virtue and sin as the main ways of evaluating people, rather than honor and shame, which is a more useful axis for thinking about Norse moral life in. What I mean is that in contemporary society, certainly earlier decades and centuries, maybe a little bit more than today, people were strongly motivated and strongly judged by other people based on conduct that could more or less be regarded as private, as matters that don't necessarily socially affect other people. Things like private devotion to God, things like perhaps a certain purity of behavior, especially around sexual mores. These kinds of things, I think, are fairly foreign to the Norse, at least in the way of thinking about them that would have been current in, say, 19th, 20th century American or European society. Instead, beyond simple survival, which of course is a major motivator for people in every time and place, the Norse are interested in accruing honor and avoiding shame, and this is a very public thing. You have honor if you do things that other people look upon as in some way valuable to them, especially if they're the right people for you to be doing things for, which in the context of your average person would be your family. You accrue honor by doing good work on your family farm. You accrue honor by bringing back perhaps good pillaged materials from another place, from a raid, and benefiting your family in that way. You accrue honor by serving on a longship, perhaps under a commander from a neighboring region, and fighting well, holding your own, not complaining, doing hard work. That sort of thing gets you honor. It's an expression of the value that the society puts on you and how it values the way that you fulfill the role society expects you to fulfill. Now, fulfilling the role that you're expected to fulfill is, of course, a significant part of this, and we see that very clearly in the kinds of insults that are lobbed at people in a Norse context in say, a saga. For example, men are expected to be strong, hard workers, hard fighters, and any kind of insult that implies that they're not one of those things, which can often be summed up in calling them women, because of course women aren't expected to fight, they aren't expected to work in the same way. You know, like many societies, there's a very different expectation of men's versus women's roles. Many of a man's failures to live up to his role as a man can be summarized by calling him a woman, even though of course he's not doing a good job of fulfilling the woman's role either. You can really tell when people are being kind of prodded to stay away from the edges of doing socially undesirable activity by when they start to be insulted. Because the insults don't necessarily always stick, right? You don't necessarily call someone a woman because you think that he literally is a woman. You are calling him that because he's not fulfilling his role as a man. And we see that very often when someone, say, doesn't work hard on the farm. This might be, of course, used on younger sons who are having a hard time adjusting to the higher workload of an adult. Might be used to someone who refuses to fight, especially someone who refuses to fight for a cause that's widely perceived as just in the society, like perhaps avenging a close family member. And Of course, there are other insults, such as calling men slaves when they're not, right? Because a higher social status is regarded as a good that has to be maintained through active accrual of honor, right? So if you are not behaving as a highly placed, high status man should, you might start to be insulted by being called a thrall, right, a slave. Or another insult the Norse use is viljalaus, which seems to be a very stinging insult. It means will-less, unable to do your own will, right, like a slave. Now, some things in honor and shame are not under your own control. This is a very surface level society in some ways, and people may be mocked really, really ruthlessly for things like physical and mental ailments, whether they got them by birth or whether they got them even in honorable battle. If you have a big scar on your face, you are probably going to be called, Ragnar Scarface or something like that. Or if you're ugly, you might be called Ragnar Ugly or Ragnar Bad Nose or something like that. There's very surface level judgments like that that are quite common in the sagas and seem just natural. They seem second nature. There's a sense in which you are less of a person when you have been damaged like that, no matter how you were damaged. Of course, that probably goes back to a pretty ruthless survival motive, right? People who have been hurt and no longer at their full capacities, of course, can't contribute as much on the farm or aboard ship or in a battle. But I think in our more virtue-sin inclined age, we look at that and feel that it's unjust because we say, well, this person, yeah, he lost an arm, but he lost his arm fighting. Or, how can you make fun of someone for being born with some kind of congenital defect that, of course, they had no choice in? The Norse don't seem to see it that way. They seem to pretty starkly evaluate people as good or bad. But that good or bad is not necessarily moral, it's just value to the community, right? I mean, we see this today a little bit. You might see it if you're familiar with a very small town. Let me give you an example of what I'm thinking about. Say there's a plumber named David. David isn't maybe the most virtuous person. Maybe he drinks a lot. Maybe it's rumored that he's lost his temper and hurt someone in an unjust fight or something like that. But if he always does his work well, on time, and under budget, people are going to call him probably a good man. Whereas Bob, who might be very privately devout, might go to church every Sunday, might be good to his kids, might be regarded as basically a bad man because you can never count on him to get work done on time. He's always late, something like that. That kind of evaluation of someone as good or bad is much more present in the minds of the Norse, I think, than the evaluation of someone as sort of abstractly virtuous or sinful in the way that Christianity, or say even today's, I don't even know what to call it, sort of progressive orthodoxy tends to evaluate people. It's a colder kind of evaluation in a sense, but it also, of course, reflects the realities of survival in a pre-modern age in a very harsh and unforgiving environment. Well, I hope this series of thoughts has been useful in helping you reframe maybe how you read Norse saga or something like that, looking maybe for what they value in someone rather than what we value. You might rethink how you consider someone like Hrafnkel in the saga Hrafnkel Frøyskodi, where he's called a bully, but also a good man, right? I mean, he holds his own. He does what's expected of him. And in his society's estimate, that's an upstanding character. And I hope that if this video has been useful to you, that you'll check out the more than 300 other videos on this Patreon-supported channel, and also my series of translations of the most important sources of Norse mythology, including the Poetic Edda, the Saga of the Volsungs, and my dual language edition of Havamal featuring the Old Norse text and commentary. All of those are now on Kindle, and the first two are also available as audiobooks. For now, from beautiful Wyoming, let me wish you all the best.